"Grandpa, tonight my parents are going to take away your fortune," whispered my granddaughter. Those words hit me harder than any storm I've ever faced. At her own birthday party, with balloons still swaying and laughter ringing in the air, my 8-year-old pulled me into the hallway and told me the truth no child should ever carry. My own son, the boy I raised, and his wife had planned to strip me of everything: my house, my savings, even my independence. I stood there staring into her worried eyes, knowing the life I thought I could trust was about to collapse. And that was the moment I decided they would regret underestimating me. The phone rang just as the first light slid across my kitchen table. It was a quiet Saturday morning in Asheville, and I had just poured myself a cup of coffee. The steam curled upward, and I sat there with the newspaper folded to yesterday's crossword, pretending for a moment that life was simple. When the phone buzzed against the oak table, I nearly spilled my coffee. No one called me at 7 in the morning, not unless something was wrong. I picked it up and saw Jason's name on the screen. My son. He never called this early. My hand tightened around the mug as I pressed answer. His voice came out too fast, cracked at the edges, the way it used to sound when he was a boy, and had dented my truck. "Dad, listen, Emma's party today. We'd love for you to come a little early." He hesitated, the silence behind him not quiet at all, but filled with muffled sounds, like someone whispering instructions. Lauren thought it would be good to talk about some family matters. Family matters. The words sank in like ice water. I looked around my kitchen, the empty chair across from me where May used to sit, the potted fern she loved drooping by the window. In 3 years of widowhood, no one had ever called me at dawn about family matters. My voice stayed calm, though my chest tightened. "Jason, when have I ever missed Emma's birthday? Why the push?" He stumbled, his words tripping over each other. "It's just, Lauren planned everything, and she really wanted me to make sure you'd be there early, around 1:30 before the guests. She's excited. We want to make sure everyone's taken care of." That phrase stuck to me like a burr. Taken care of. I had heard it in boardrooms when younger men pitched deals they didn't believe in. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. Outside the window, the Hendersons were already watering their flower boxes. Life on the street carried on, ordinary and innocent. But in Jason's voice I heard strain. Lauren's name dropped too often, her hand pressing on every word. "Of course I'll be there," I said. I wouldn't miss Emma's day for anything. My granddaughter's smile was the brightest thing left in my world since May passed. But as I hung up, I set the mug down too hard, and coffee splashed onto the paper. The crossword bled black where ink met liquid, a blot spreading like doubt. I walked to the fridge and looked at Emma's latest drawing, stuck beside my grocery list. Purple crayon lines made a crooked house with 4 stick figures. She had labeled them carefully. Grandpa, Daddy, Mommy, me. My throat tightened. That little girl thought our family stood together. She didn't see the cracks running through the walls. Not yet. I sat again at the table, the phone still in my hand. Jason's laugh had sounded wrong, metallic, forced. Lauren's planning, Lauren's insistence, Lauren's excitement. Since when had she cared whether I came early? Last Christmas, she had barely spoken to me, scrolling her phone between bites of turkey. Something was shifting. Something I couldn't name yet, but I felt it like thunder far off, rolling closer. I tried to steady myself. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe Lauren truly wanted to patch things up. Maybe this was about family traditions, about keeping Emma's birthdays bigger than the sorrows we'd endured. But I'd spent 40 years reading men across tables, catching the flicker in their eyes when they lied. My own son's voice had carried that same guilty tremor. The clock ticked on the wall. 7:15. The whole day stretched ahead, and with it a shadow I couldn't shake. I rinsed the cup and set it in the sink, though I hadn't taken more than 2 sips. I walked to the closet and touched May's shawl that still hung by the door, as if she might reach for it on her way out to church. My chest ached with missing her, with wishing she were here to read the lines I was missing. I told myself to breathe, to focus on the simple, Buy Emma a present. Wrap it with care. Show up as the grandfather she deserved. Yet beneath that resolve, the words kept echoing, twisting darker each time. Taken care of. I couldn't tell yet if it meant comfort or control. But by the end of this day, I knew I'd find out. When the house is quiet, I sometimes walk through it as if May were still here. Every object carries her touch. The fern by the window, the quilts folded neatly in the cedar chest, the portrait of us on the Blue Ridge Parkway that hides the safe behind its frame. I stood there that morning after Jason's call and ran my hand along the edge of the frame until my fingers found the latch. The safe clicked open, and the smell of paper and iron rose up like a ghost. Inside were records, files, check stubs, receipts. My ledger of love, though at times it felt more like a record of slow surrender. I had given Jason and Lauren $72,000 over the last 3 years. At first it was just a few hundred to cover a late mortgage payment. Then the car needed a new transmission. Then Emma's private school tuition. Then groceries when Jason's hours were cut. Each request seemed reasonable on its own, especially when paired with Jason's downcast eyes and Lauren's perfectly timed gratitude. She always knew how to say thank you in a way that made refusal feel cruel. And I never wanted Emma to suffer for their mistakes. So I kept writing checks. I kept moving money from savings, convincing myself it was temporary. I sat at my desk and looked at the columns I had drawn across yellow legal pads. Mortgage, car, tuition, medical, groceries. Each line a moment when I chose peace over confrontation. Each number an echo of May's voice, telling me to watch Jason carefully. She had seen something I had not, the way Lauren framed every conversation around Emma, making me feel selfish if I questioned the expense. May had been right, but I only hear her warnings now when it is too late to ask for her counsel. The house creaked as the morning warmed. I pulled out a folder of bank statements and traced the rising tide of withdrawals. At first hundreds, then thousands. The pattern was clear now, in black and white. My generosity had not fixed anything. It had only trained them to ask for more. I closed my eyes and remembered the first time Jason stood in this very room with a folded bill in his hand, sheepish at 20 years old, asking if I could help him cover rent. May had said, "Let him learn." I had said, "He is still my boy." That choice had set a path I could no longer deny. I pushed back from the desk and walked to the kitchen. On the fridge, Emma's drawing still hung, the crooked house with all 4 of us smiling. I touched the paper gently, feeling the waxy ridges of crayon under my fingertips. She believed in us. She believed the stick figures meant something real. I felt a heaviness in my chest, knowing how far the truth had drifted from that innocent picture. I poured myself another cup of coffee but left it untouched, staring instead at the list beside her drawing. Eggs, milk, bread. Simple needs, nothing more. How had the list of my family's needs become so complicated, so endless? I thought of the nights I had sat in the bleachers at Emma's softball games, hearing Lauren brag to other parents about the school Emma attended, about the SUV they drove. She never mentioned who kept those things afloat. She never mentioned the grandfather who dipped into retirement so a little girl could have a better uniform or a private tutor. I had told myself it did not matter as long as Emma thrived, but the silence of acknowledgement had grown heavy, and now it pressed on me like a weight I could no longer carry. I returned to the office and closed the safe. The click of the lock echoed too loudly in the empty house. I sat for a long time staring at May's portrait. She wore her Sunday dress, the one with the blue flowers, and her smile seemed both kind and firm. She would have told me to draw a line. She would have told me that love without boundaries becomes weakness. I whispered to the empty room that I had only tried to keep us together, that every check was meant to buy peace, that every payment was a hope that Jason might find his footing. The silence answered me with its own truth. I had been buying time, not peace. I had been paying for a family image that was already cracking. The clock ticked toward noon, and the house filled with the smell of dust and paper. I folded my notes and slid them back into the safe. I felt older than my 68 years, but also clearer. The ledger no longer looked like proof of love. It looked like evidence in a trial that had not yet begun. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that Jason and Lauren were not finished asking. And I knew that if I did not stop, there would be nothing left for Emma. The thought steeled me, even as it broke my heart. I closed the portrait over the safe and whispered to May that I was ready to face whatever came. It was near midday when I stepped out to water the lavender May had planted by the front porch. The purple buds were just beginning to open, filling the air with a fragrance that reminded me of her hands after she worked in the garden. I bent down to pull a weed and heard the screen door creak. My neighbor, Mrs. Green, was walking across the street carrying a paper bag from the farmer's market. Her white sun hat shaded her face, and she raised a hand in greeting. "Walter," she called, "you'll never guess who I ran into earlier this week." I set down the watering can and leaned against the porch rail. Her visits were usually filled with harmless chatter, the kind of neighborly talk that keeps the street alive. I smiled. "Who was it, Evelyn?" She crossed the road slowly, careful with the bag balanced on her hip. "You're Jason, and that wife of his. I saw them Tuesday morning downtown, right outside Blue Ridge First Bank. They were carrying a stack of papers. Looked important." The words caught me off guard. Tuesday morning. Bank papers. I felt the weight of the watering can handle pressing into my palm. I kept my face calm. "That's so? Probably just routine business," I said lightly. Mrs. Green chuckled. "Could be. They looked mighty serious, though. Jason barely noticed me when I waved." Lauren smiled that polished smile of hers, but they hurried off. I thought, well, they must be signing their lives away on some refinance. Young people always refinancing something. I forced a small laugh. "Yes, always something." She touched my arm gently before heading back across the street. "Anyway, don't let me hold you up. Those lavender plants look beautiful this year. May would be proud." "Oh." I watched her go, the summer light bouncing off her sun hat, and felt a knot tighten in my chest. The image of Jason and Lauren walking out of the bank with papers gnawed at me. "Mrs. Green had no reason to exaggerate. She was sharp for her age, still volunteering at the library, still remembering details. She had seen them with her own eyes. I returned to the lavender and tried to focus on trimming the brown stems, but my mind kept circling back to the call that morning, to Jason's nervous voice, to Lauren's invisible hand guiding his words. Family matters. Everyone taken care of. Bank papers. The pieces clicked together in ways I didn't want to accept. I carried the cuttings into the kitchen, their scent flooding the air. On the counter sat the gift list I had been sketching for Emma. A Lego set, maybe a new bicycle, something that would light up her eyes. I had promised myself that no matter what doubts haunted me, I would not let them shadow her birthday. Still, the thought of Jason and Lauren at the bank pressed like a stone in my chest. What were they preparing? Why had Jason not mentioned it? I poured a glass of water and stared at the ripples. For years I had excused his silence. He was shy. He was distracted. He did not want to worry me. But now, after all the money I had given, after all the nights May and I had prayed he would stand on his own 2 feet, I knew better. Silence could be a strategy as much as a flaw. I walked to the den where Emma's fishing trip drawing still hung on the wall. 2 stick figures by a blue lake, smiling. She had written "Best Day Ever" in bold purple letters. My throat tightened. That little girl was my compass. No matter what her parents planned, I had to keep my course set on her well-being. So I decided. I would go to the mall in the morning and buy the gifts myself. I would wrap them with care. I would hand them to her with love. And I would watch Jason and Lauren carefully. If there was truth hiding in those papers from the bank, it would show in their faces soon enough. I picked up the lavender cuttings and tied them with a bit of twine, setting them by May's picture in the living room. The smell filled the house, sweet and sharp, mingling with the silence. I whispered to her frame, "They're up to something, May. I feel it. But I'll keep my eyes open." The clock ticked steady on the wall. The day was slipping forward. I knew the evening would bring nothing more than restless pacing and unfinished thoughts. The truth was coming, carried on the scent of lavender and the rustle of bank papers. I did not yet know the shape of it, but I knew enough to brace myself. By the time I pulled into Jason's driveway that afternoon, the sun was already high and the neighborhood street was lined with cars. From the curb I could see balloons tied to the mailbox, pink and yellow against the blue sky, and paper streamers fluttering from the porch rail. It looked cheerful on the surface, but even before I stepped out of the car, I felt a tightness in my stomach. The laughter drifting from the backyard was pitched too high, too rehearsed, as if everyone was acting a little too hard for the part they had been given. The front door opened before I could even ring the bell. Lauren stood there with a smile stretched wider than I had ever seen it. "Walter, you look wonderful today," she said, her voice sweet as frosting. She reached out and touched my arm as if we were dear friends, though in the past she had treated me with polite indifference. I handed her the wrapped box that held the Lego set and nodded toward the larger package still in the car. "There's something bigger out there for Emma. I'll bring it in later." She clapped her hands together, eyes sparkling like stage lights, and told me how thoughtful I was. Inside, the house had been transformed. Streamers hung from every doorway, balloons clustered in the corners, a table overloaded with cupcakes and cookies glistened under the lights. It was far more elaborate than the birthdays of years past. I noticed right away how the furniture had been arranged. The couches angled to keep groups of guests in clusters. The gift table positioned so that Emma would always be in view. The kitchen door left wide open so Lauren could slip in and out, hovering. It felt more like a reception than a child's party. "Dad, there you are," Jason called from the living room. He bounded toward me with an energy that almost startled me. He clapped a hand on my shoulder and turned to a man standing nearby. "This is my father, the smartest man I know. He built a business from nothing. He taught me everything about loyalty." The man, some coworker of Jason's, nodded politely while Jason laughed too loudly. It was the kind of praise Jason had never given me in private. Every word sounded like it had been written on a cue card. I let him guide me into the room, shaking hands with neighbors and school parents. Mrs. Whitaker, Emma's teacher, smiled warmly, while the Martinez family helped their son arrange a board game on the coffee table. But what drew my eyes was Emma herself. She ran toward me with genuine joy, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered, handing her the gift bag. Her face lit up when she saw the Statue of Liberty Lego set, though I caught something in her eyes, a flicker of sadness that she quickly buried when Lauren appeared at her side. "Isn't Grandpa generous?" Lauren said, her tone bright but firm. Emma looked up at me and murmured, "Thank you, Grandpa. It's really cool." Her smile pulled tight, her voice carrying more weight than a child should know. The hours blurred with laughter that didn't feel quite real. Lauren floated from guest to guest, her hand brushing my arm whenever she passed, always asking if I was comfortable, if I needed more wine, if the chair was soft enough. Jason kept interjecting into conversations, praising my wisdom, my generosity, my supposed influence. I watched their eyes flick to each other across the room, subtle nods, glances that lasted just a second too long. It was a performance, carefully timed, carefully rehearsed. I sat with Mrs. Whitaker for a while, listening to her talk about Emma's progress in school. She leaned closer and mentioned quietly that Emma had asked her a strange question last week, something about whether grandparents and parents ever disagreed about important decisions. I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside my heart clenched. My granddaughter was carrying something far heavier than any 8-year-old should. The party went on, music from a Bluetooth speaker filling the air, children shouting with excitement as they chased balloons down the hallway. I forced myself to smile, to accept Lauren's canapes and Jason's booming laughter. But behind my polite nods, I was cataloging every detail, every exaggerated compliment, every moment when Jason guided conversations away from money and toward my house, my health, my supposed need for help. By late afternoon, the guests began to gather their coats and thank Lauren for the lovely party. Jason caught my eye across the room and raised his eyebrows as if reminding me of our earlier conversation. "Dad, stick around after everyone leaves," he said casually. Too casually. "We really want to talk about those family matters." The words landed like a stone in my chest. I smiled faintly and excused myself to the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway lined with family photos, I felt Emma's eyes on me. She stood by the gift table, her little hands fidgeting with the ribbon of a balloon. There was worry in her face, a kind of determination too strong for her age. I paused, sensing she wanted to say something, but voices called from the living room, and she quickly looked away. I washed my hands slowly, staring at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. The lines in my face looked deeper in that light. My jaw tightened as I realized the truth. This party was not just a celebration, it was a stage. And I was the main act they were trying to guide, smiling too hard, flattering too much, preparing me for the conversation that waited once the balloons deflated and the neighbors drove away. The noise of the party faded as I stepped into the hallway. The walls were lined with framed photographs, some faded with time, others more recent with forced smiles. My footsteps echoed softly on the hardwood floor. I pretended to study the pictures as if I were simply taking a quiet break, but in truth I needed to breathe, to steady myself before Jason and Lauren closed in with whatever plan they had rehearsed. Then I heard it. Small footsteps behind me, light as a bird. I turned and saw Emma standing there, still in her birthday dress, her hair tied with a pink ribbon that had started to sag. She looked down the hall toward the living room where the laughter still rolled like waves, then back at me. Her eyes were wide, serious. Far too serious for an 8-year-old. "Grandpa," she whispered, barely loud enough to reach me. I knelt down so we were eye to eye. The hallway smelled faintly of candles and frosting, but around her hung the sharp air of fear. She bit her lip, a habit I recognized from May whenever she was worried. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice calm though my heart had begun to pound. Her words tumbled out in a rush, as if she had been carrying them all day. "I need to tell you something important about Mom and Dad." I placed my hand on her small shoulder. "Go on," I said, though dread was already tightening in my chest. She leaned closer, her voice almost breaking. "They're planning to take your money tonight, after everyone goes home. I heard them talking last night when I was supposed to be asleep." The hallway tilted slightly around me. I held onto the doorframe to steady myself, but kept my expression calm for her sake. "What exactly did you hear, Emma?" Her eyes darted toward the living room again. "Mom said you have too much money for an old man living alone. She told Dad they were going to fix that problem tonight. Dad sounded scared, but Mom said the papers from the bank would make everything legal." The papers. Dorothy's words about seeing them downtown flashed in my mind. It all locked into place with brutal clarity. I felt the old instincts of a businessman roar back to life, sharper than they had been in years. "Did they say anything else?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Emma's voice dropped lower, trembling. "Dad kept saying, 'What if he finds out?' And Mom said it would be too late by then." Tears welled in her eyes. "Grandpa, I don't want them to take your money. You're the only one who really listens to me." I pulled her into my arms and held her tightly. Her small body shook against me. My throat burned with a mix of rage and heartbreak. To plan such betrayal was one thing, but to let a child overhear it, to burden her with secrets meant for lawyers and courts, that cut deeper than anything else. "You did the right thing telling me," I whispered into her hair. "But we need to keep this our secret for now, all right? Can you do that?" She nodded against my chest. "Are you going to stop them?" "Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to handle everything." I pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, making sure she saw the certainty in mine. "But we need to go back out there now and act like nothing's wrong. Can you be brave for me?" She sniffled and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I think so. Will you still love me if Mom and Dad get mad?" The question hit me like a physical blow. My vision blurred for a moment, but I held her face in my hands. "Emma, Nothing your parents do could ever change how much I love you. Nothing. Do you understand? Relief softened her expression. She managed a small, genuine smile, the first I had seen from her all afternoon. I love you too, Grandpa. I kissed her forehead and stood, taking her hand in mine. Together we walked back toward the hum of voices and clinking glasses. The living room came back into view, full of neighbors saying their goodbyes, Jason laughing too loud, Lauren hovering with practiced concern. But everything had changed. I saw them now, not as family hosting a birthday, but as actors in a performance meant to trap me once the curtain fell. I squeezed Emma's hand gently, and she squeezed back, her eyes steady despite her age. She had trusted me with the truth, and I would not let that trust be broken. When we stepped into the room, Jason caught my eye and waved, his smile bright and false. I smiled back just enough to keep the mask in place. The role of the tired grandfather was still mine to play, but inside I had shifted. The trap they had built was waiting, but I would not walk into it blind. Emma's whisper in the hall had lit the path forward, and though my heart was heavy, my resolve was unshakable. I walked back into the living room with Emma at my side, and the noise of the party wrapped around us like a curtain. My smile felt tight, my chest heavy, but I forced myself to wear the mask they expected. I had spent decades in business meetings, reading faces, feigning calm, pretending to agree when I was already planning my next move. Now those same skills would serve me in my own son's home. Lauren swept over almost immediately with a glass of wine in her hand. "Walter, you look a little pale. Sit down, let me get you something to eat," she said, her voice smooth but her eyes sharp. She pressed the glass into my hand before I could answer. I let it hover near my lips without drinking. Jason joined us, his laugh carrying across the room like a bell that had been struck too hard. "Dad, tell them about the time you closed that big contract in Atlanta," he urged, nudging me forward as if I were a trophy he wanted to show off. I told the story, slow and halting, as though age had blunted my memory. They leaned in, nodding with rehearsed admiration, but I could feel the impatience under their smiles. I made a show of rubbing my temples, blinking as though light bothered me. "These headaches lately," I murmured. "Sometimes it's hard to keep the details straight." Jason jumped in quickly, patting my shoulder. "That's all right, Dad. You've had a lot on your mind. You don't need to strain yourself." His words dripped with sympathy, but his glance at Lauren told a different story. Lauren crouched beside my chair, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Families are supposed to help each other. You shouldn't have to worry about everything alone." Her smile was bright, but the tone carried a practiced edge. I nodded slowly, letting my eyes wander unfocused around the room, as if I were fading. Inside, my mind was sharp as a blade. I catalogued every glance they exchanged, every time Jason redirected conversation away from money and toward my house or my health. Neighbors mentioned rising costs and retirement accounts, but Jason's laugh cut them off. Lauren's canapes appeared at just the right moment, always steering the subject elsewhere. I played along, letting my voice drift into gentle confusion. "Did I already tell that story?" I asked a group of parents, frowning slightly. "I can't remember." They smiled politely, and Jason quickly said, "It's fine, Dad, you've told it before." Lauren filled my plate again, her fingers brushing mine too deliberately, as though testing how steady I was. Emma watched me from across the room. Her eyes followed every move, worried but brave, remembering our promise in the hall. I gave her the smallest nod, enough to reassure her that I was in control. She straightened her back and turned to play with her friends, her courage giving me strength. As the evening stretched, I leaned into the role more fully. When someone asked if I wanted another drink, I paused too long before answering. When a neighbor spoke about his new mortgage, I asked him to repeat himself, tilting my head like I had trouble following. The performance drew subtle relief from Lauren. I saw it in the way her shoulders relaxed, in the flicker of satisfaction that passed across her face before she masked it with concern. By the time the sun dipped lower and shadows lengthened through the blinds, My role as the weary grandfather was complete. Guests began to leave, thanking Jason and Lauren for the lovely party. I stood at the door shaking hands, moving slowly, smiling faintly, giving them exactly what they expected to see. A man past his sharpest years, grateful for the attention of his family. When the last guest walked out, Jason clapped his hands together. "Dad, why don't you stay a little longer? We can talk about those things we mentioned." His tone was casual, but his eyes betrayed urgency. Lauren moved closer, her arm brushing mine. "Yes, Walter, just a short chat. It'll be good for everyone." I forced a tired smile, letting my shoulders sag. "I do feel a bit worn out tonight. Maybe another time," I said softly. Their alarm was instant. Jason's hand lingered on my arm, heavier than necessary. "It won't take long. You'll feel better after we get it sorted." Lauren's lips tightened before she smiled again. "You don't want to put it off. Some things are better handled right away." Inside, I felt the fire of May's warning, the echo of Emma's whisper, but I kept my mask in place. I looked at them with weary eyes, nodding slightly as though too tired to argue. In truth, I was only observing, improvising, letting them believe the play was working. Every gesture, every word they offered confirmed what I already knew. When I finally stepped out into the cooling evening air, I carried more than gifts from a party. I carried the certainty that they thought me weak, that they believed their performance had convinced me. I walked slowly to my car, playing the part to the very end. But behind my eyes the plan was forming, sharper, with every step. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. The cicadas were singing from the trees, and the porch light flickered as if it too was tired of standing watch. I sat in the car for a long moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the silence press against me. My chest still carried the echo of Emma's whisper and the practiced smiles of Jason and Lauren. I had worn my mask well, but now in the quiet there was no need to pretend. I was not a frail old man. I was a man who had built 40 years of work with my hands and my mind, and I was not about to let it be stolen. I walked into the house and closed the door softly behind me. The room smelled of lavender and old wood, familiar and steady. I poured myself a glass of water and set it down untouched on the counter. My eyes went to the living room wall where May's portrait hung above the safe. She was smiling in her Sunday dress with the blue flowers, her eyes steady and kind, her hair pinned back the way she liked for church. That portrait had been my anchor since the day we buried her. Tonight it was more than that. It was my reminder that she had warned me. "Watch Jason carefully," she had said. "Weak people make dangerous choices when someone stronger is whispering in their ear." I stood in front of the portrait until I could almost hear her voice. Then I pressed the latch and swung the frame open. The safe door gleamed in the dim light. My fingers moved by memory across the combination, numbers tied forever to May's birthday. The lock released with a click, and I opened the door to rows of folders, ledgers, and deeds. The weight of my life's work lay in those pages. I carried the files to my desk and spread them out in the pool of lamplight. Bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, old check stubs. I pulled out the yellow legal pad where I had begun to list the payments made to Jason and Lauren. Each line marked another moment I had chosen to give instead of question. Mortgage payments, car repairs, tuition checks, medical bills, 247 transactions over 3 years. I read them aloud into the silence until my throat grew raw. I wanted the walls themselves to witness how long I had let this go on. As I studied the numbers, patterns revealed themselves. The requests had not been random. They had grown month after month, conditioning me to agree to larger and larger amounts. It was not family need, it was strategy. My anger rose, but beneath it was clarity. They had been preparing me, softening the ground before the real theft. Tonight had only been the curtain rising. I wrote out a new list, not of money given, but of steps to take. First, secure the documents. Second, call Robert Chen at the bank. He had been a trusted friend for 2 decades, a man who valued honesty. He would understand what I needed to know about whatever papers Jason and Lauren had handled on Tuesday. Third, Contact Dana Ortiz, the notary I had used for years in my business. She was discreet and sharp, not easily fooled. Fourth, speak to my attorney about revising my will and trust. Emma's future needed to be shielded from her parents' greed. I sat back in the chair and looked again at May's portrait. I felt her gaze steadying me. I spoke to her as if she were sitting across the desk. I should have listened sooner, I whispered. But I will not fail Emma. Not now. The clock ticked past midnight. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint rush of cars on the highway beyond the hills. I leaned forward and began writing out the plan in careful order, like blueprints for a house. I had built homes from foundations, poured concrete, raised beams, nailed down roofs. This was no different. It required patience, precision, and strength. When I finally closed the safe and swung the portrait back into place, I felt the weight of resolve settle over me. I turned off the lamp and let the house sink into darkness. The cicadas still sang. The night still stretched long ahead, but I no longer felt the gnaw of confusion. I was the watchman of this home. I was the guardian of May's memory and Emma's future. And while Jason and Lauren plotted in whispers, I was already drawing the lines of a plan that would expose them. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. Porch lights glowed in the distance. My neighbors slept peacefully, unaware that betrayal was being prepared under their noses. I would let Jason and Lauren think I was still the tired old man who rubbed his temples and forgot his stories. But behind the mask I was awake, every sense sharpened. In the stillness of the night I made a silent vow. They would not take what May and I had built. They would not steal Emma's future. And when the time came, they would see that the man they thought was fading was still very much alive, watching and ready. Sunday morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed down on the mountains until even the ridgelines seemed tired. I sat at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee cooling in my hands and the yellow legal pad open before me. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I had slept little. My mind had been turning over Jason's forced laughter, Lauren's watchful eyes, and Emma's whisper in the hall. I knew I could not waste the day. At 9 o'clock sharp, I picked up the phone and dialed Robert Chen's personal number. I had known Robert for more than 20 years. He had been the banker who helped me secure loans when I expanded from a single truck to a small fleet, the man who never forgot a birthday card for May and who sent a bouquet to her funeral. I trusted him, and trust had become a rare currency in my life. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm. "Walter, always a pleasure to hear from you. What's on your mind this Sunday morning?" I forced my tone to sound casual. "Robert, I've been reviewing my investments, thinking of simplifying things, maybe consolidating. I wanted your thoughts." There was a pause on the line, then his professional voice kicked in, measured and steady. "That's a wise step. We have several programs depending on the level of management you're comfortable with. Are you thinking automated services or more comprehensive assistance?" I let the silence stretch, then asked, "What about power of attorney arrangements, conservatorships, those kinds of management tools? Do you deal with that often?" Another pause, longer this time. "Funny you should ask," he said carefully. "Just last week I had a couple inquire about guardianship and conservatorship for an elderly family member. They seemed unusually well prepared." The words jolted through me. I set the mug down quickly, sloshing coffee onto the pad. I forced my voice to remain even. "Prepared in what way?" "They knew the terminology, the documentation requirements, even the timelines for court approval," Robert said. "They asked about expedited processes, emergency filings, medical competency evaluations. It struck me because most families come in confused, overwhelmed. These two had already done their homework." I stared at May's portrait across the room, the calm of her painted eyes watching me. Jason and Lauren. There was no doubt. I could see them standing in Robert's office with their manila folders, Lauren's polished smile covering Jason's nervous shifting. Robert continued, "Of course I can't disclose client names, you understand. Confidentiality. but the questions were specific. They wanted to know how quickly control could be established if the relative was deemed incompetent. Ugh. Incompetent. The word stung like a slap. They had already written the script in which I was the doddering fool, unable to manage my own life. They had already plotted how to remove me from the home May and I built, how to strip me of authority while pretending to care for my welfare. I managed to keep my voice steady. That's thoughtful of them, whoever they were. Families these days always planning ahead. Robert chuckled politely. Yes, though I must say it was impressive how much preparation they'd done. They even mentioned having documentation ready, medical opinions prepared, said the process would move quickly once initiated. My stomach turned. So it was not just idle talk. They had medical opinions lined up, paperwork in hand, a timeline mapped out. This was no passing idea. This was a trap already constructed, waiting for me to stumble into it. Thank you, Robert, I said quietly. That gives me a better sense of options. I'll be in touch soon. After we ended the call, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, my hands trembling against the yellow pad. I wrote down every phrase he had used: conservatorship, competency evaluations, expedited processes, documentation ready. Each word was another stone in the wall Jason and Lauren were building around me. I rose from the table and paced the living room, the floor creaking under my weight. The anger inside me grew hot, but it was tempered by clarity. They thought they had me cornered, but they had underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was before grief softened my edges. They had forgotten that I had built a company from nothing, negotiated contracts with men twice as ruthless as them, managed crews, weathered recessions, buried my wife, and kept moving. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath it, I felt a surge of resolve. I would not be declared incompetent while I could still see the truth so clearly. I would not hand over my life to a pair of greedy hands. I returned to the desk and began drafting the next steps. Secure witnesses, gather evidence, review the will, protect Emma's inheritance. Every letter I wrote steadied me. The gray light outside shifted as the morning wore on. My phone buzzed with a new call. Jason's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring until it stopped, then stared at the silence that followed. They were already worried. They would be pushing harder now. I closed my eyes and breathed in the lavender May had planted by the porch. Her voice echoed in my memory. Watch Jason carefully. I opened my eyes and looked at her portrait. I'm watching May, I whispered, and I'm ready. Sunday afternoon slipped into evening with a restless quiet. I walked through the house, rehearsing the part I had already begun to play. My hand brushed along the back of May's favorite chair, the one she always sat in to read her devotionals, and I told myself I had to look smaller, weaker, as if the years had pressed down harder than they really had. I loosened my collar, shuffled my steps, and practiced the way my voice should trail off at the end of a sentence. This was no longer about pretending for neighbors or passing guests. This was about drawing them in, letting them believe their scheme was working. When the phone rang around 6, I knew who it would be. Jason's number glowed on the screen. I let it buzz twice before answering with a weary hello. His voice carried forced warmth. Dad, I'm glad you picked up. We wanted to stop by tonight, bring some papers that might help with everything you've been dealing with. I rubbed my temple loudly enough for him to hear through the line. Papers? I asked, making my tone uncertain. I don't follow. Just some things to make life easier, Jason said quickly. I could hear Lauren's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. He hesitated, then added, power of attorney forms, medical management, financial support, that kind of thing. You wouldn't have to worry about bills or decisions anymore. We'd handle it for you. I let the silence stretch until he started to speak again. Then I interrupted softly. That does sound easier. But my head aches tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Lauren's voice came closer to the phone, too sweet. Walter, we'll just bring them by. No pressure. You can look them over. It will give you peace of mind. I agreed with a tired sigh. and when the line went dead, I sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the wood. They were moving exactly as I expected. They believed my performance. They believed I was ready to sign away everything just to relieve the fog in my mind. When they arrived an hour later, Lauren carried a sleek leather portfolio. Jason followed, shifting from foot to foot, eyes darting. They settled me into my own armchair as though arranging me for a photograph. Lauren spread the documents on the coffee table, each page marked with yellow tabs where my signature was meant to go. She spoke in a soothing rhythm, words polished by rehearsal. This section covers medical appointments. This page would allow us to manage banking for you. And here, Walter, this one ensures the house is maintained properly. You wouldn't have to carry any of that weight anymore. I leaned forward, squinting as if the text blurred. So many words, I murmured, letting my hand tremble slightly as I lifted a page. I used to understand these things better. Lately, it's all so complicated. Jason jumped in quickly. That's why we're here, Dad, to help. You've done enough. It's time you let us take care of things. I rubbed my temples again and nodded faintly. Maybe tomorrow. When my head clears, tonight feels too much. Lauren's smile faltered, just for a flicker, but she recovered. Of course, whatever makes you comfortable. We'll leave the documents with you so you can think it over. She slid the neat stack across the table, the tabs glowing under the lamplight like warning signs only I could read. I thanked them softly, my voice thin, and walked them to the door with slow steps. Jason hugged me, his arms stiff, and whispered, "We just want to help, Dad." I patted his back and let my shoulders sag as though his strength was holding me up. When they drove away, I closed the door and leaned against it, the mask slipping for the first time all evening. I carried the papers to my desk and spread them out. The language was professional, thorough, and dangerous. Power of attorney, guardianship, authority over medical care and real estate. If I signed, they would own not just my money, but my choices, my freedom. I read each line carefully, steady now, marking notes in the margins. They had invested real money in this consultation. They had thought of everything, except the possibility that I was still alert, still strong, still unwilling to surrender. I stacked the papers neatly and placed them back in the leather folder. Then I wrote a time on my yellow pad. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That would be the moment. I would have Robert at the house, his banker's portfolio in hand. I would have Dana with her notary seal, ready to observe. And I would invite Jason and Lauren back, letting them think I had finally agreed. The dress rehearsal was over. They had played their parts with polished lines and careful smiles, but I had played mine better. Tonight I was the weary grandfather with a cloudy mind. Tomorrow I would be the man they had forgotten I still was, the man May had believed in, the man Emma still trusted. And when the curtain rose again, it would not be me trapped in their scheme. It would be them, caught under the weight of their own signatures and lies. Monday morning broke cool and gray, a thin mist rolling over the hills like smoke. I was awake long before dawn, walking the house in silence, setting each detail in place the way a man arranges tools before a job. In the living room, I moved the coffee table closer to my desk, angled the chairs so they faced each other, and placed a fresh pad of paper beside a stack of evidence I had collected. It looked less like a home now and more like a hearing room. That was exactly what I intended. At 9:45, the doorbell rang. Dana Ortiz stood on the porch with her notary seal in one hand and her leather journal in the other. She had notarized dozens of contracts for me over the years, never missing a detail. Her calm eyes scanned the living room as I invited her in. "Set up wherever you like," I said softly. She chose a side table where the light fell just right and began arranging her papers. At 10 sharp another knock sounded. Robert Chen entered with his banker's portfolio tucked under his arm. He smiled warmly, but his eyes carried the weight of a man who already understood more than he was free to say. "Ready to review that portfolio, Walter?" he asked. I nodded and gestured him to the chair across from my desk. The stage was set when I heard the familiar sound of Jason's car pulling into the drive. Moments later, they walked through the door, Lauren carrying the same leather folder, Jason at her side with a smile that looked forced. They both froze for a heartbeat when they saw Robert and Dana already seated. But Lauren recovered quickly, her tone smooth. "How thoughtful of you, Walter, to bring professionals. This will make everything so much more official." I smiled, but it was not the weary smile I had worn the day before. My voice carried steadiness they had not expected. "Yes, official is best. Please, have a seat." Jason lowered himself into the chair opposite me, his smile trembling at the edges. "Dad, you sound better today, more like your old self." "Exactly like my old self," I said, leaning forward. "Sharp, observant, and capable. Which is why I need to tell you something before we sign any documents." Lauren's pen hovered above her checklist. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice clipped. "Nothing is wrong with me," I said calmly, "but I am completely aware of your plan." The silence in the room stretched taut. Jason's smile faltered, his color draining. "Dad, what plan? We're here to help you." I turned to Robert. "Would you mind sharing what they discussed during their appointment at your bank last Tuesday?" Robert cleared his throat, professional as ever. "They asked very detailed questions about conservatorship procedures, documentation requirements for declaring someone mentally incompetent, and expedited court processes for emergency financial management." Dana looked up from her journal, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Brooks, are you saying these power of attorney documents were prepared under false pretenses?" "I'm saying they planned to have me declared incompetent so they could take everything I've worked 40 years to build." Jason's voice came out strangled. "Dad, we were worried about you. Yesterday you seemed so confused." "Yesterday I was performing," I said firmly. "Today you are seeing the truth." I pulled out the stack of receipts and statements I had prepared. 247 transactions over 3 years, $72,000 in support payments, mortgage, cars, tuition, medical bills, each one documented. Every dollar given because I believed you were struggling, honestly, but all the while you were preparing to take more. Lauren leaned forward, desperation creeping into her voice. "Those were legitimate family expenses. You're twisting everything." I met her gaze steadily. "Love does not involve conspiracy. Love does not involve researching how to steal someone's independence while they are still healthy and competent." Robert spoke quietly. "The questions they asked were very specific. Most families never encounter those terms unless they intend something significant." Dana nodded, her pen still in her hand. "In my experience, genuine family planning does not involve competency evaluations." The room was silent except for Jason's labored breathing. He looked at me as if seeing someone he had forgotten, the man who had built homes, run crews, and stood unbending in the face of storms. His voice cracked. "What happens now?" I stood, feeling every year in my bones, yet also every ounce of the strength those years had given me. "Now we discuss consequences." From the drawer I pulled new documents, the draft of a revised will and trust. I spread them across the desk for Dana to witness. "I am changing everything. My estate will go into an educational trust for Emma, accessible only when she turns 21. It will provide for her college education in whatever path she chooses, but it will not line the pockets of those who conspired against me." Lauren's composure broke. "Walter, you can't do this to your own family." "I am protecting my family," I said, "from parents who were willing to sacrifice their daughter's peace of mind for greed." Dana examined the documents, her expression professional but firm. "These terms are clear. Once signed and notarized, they are binding." Jason buried his face in his hands. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." Lauren said nothing, and her silence told me everything I needed to know. I signed the documents with a steady hand. Dana notarized them, Robert witnessed, and the weight of betrayal shifted from me onto the shoulders of the two who had carried it all along. When it was done, I looked at them one last time. "Words are cheap. What matters now is action. For the sake of your daughter, you had better learn that lesson." The living room was no longer a stage. It was a courtroom, and the verdict had been delivered. The room felt heavy after the last signature was set down, and Dana closed her notary book. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Jason sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Lauren stood rigid, her arms crossed, her polished smile finally gone. I let the quiet linger, because sometimes silence delivers the sharpest blow. I gathered the documents into a neat stack and tapped them against the desk. "This is the line," I said softly but firmly. "From this day forward, everything changes." I looked straight at Jason. "The trust I just signed protects Emma. Every dollar of my estate will go into it. She will have what she needs when she is grown, for college, for her future, for any honest dream she chooses. Veterinary school, engineering, teaching, it will all be possible for her. She is my priority now, and this ensures that she cannot be harmed by anyone else's choices." Jason's eyes flickered with something like relief, but it was buried beneath shame. He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. I turned to Lauren. "You will not touch another cent of my money. Not for your house, not for your car, not for groceries, not for conveniences dressed up as emergencies. Those days are over. You tried to turn my kindness into dependency, but I will not bankroll your lives any longer." Her jaw clenched and she snapped. "How are we supposed to live without your support?" "The same way millions of other families live," I answered evenly. "By working, by budgeting, by learning responsibility. You both have degrees. You are capable of holding jobs that pay your bills. You have chosen not to because my wallet was always open. That door is closed now." Jason's shoulders slumped. He rubbed his face with both hands. "Dad, we made mistakes, but we can change. We'll do better." I leaned forward. "It will take more than words. You want me to reconsider someday? Then prove it. Get steady jobs. Build a life without leaning on me. Show Emma you are capable of being the parents she deserves. Until then, you are cut off. Mortgage assistance ends today. Car payments, tuition checks, every lifeline you have been using to avoid responsibility gone." The words hit like stones dropped into water. The ripples spread across their faces. Lauren turned away, pacing, muttering under her breath about unfairness, about being abandoned. Jason sat frozen, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Robert cleared his throat gently. "Walter, the trust structure is solid. Emma will have opportunities many children never get. You made the right choice." Dana added, "These documents will hold up in any court. The boundaries are clear. No one can manipulate them now." Their voices were steady, professional, but I could feel the weight of support behind them. It mattered that Jason and Lauren heard this from others, not just from me. I slid the signed papers into a manila envelope and locked them in the safe behind May's portrait. When I closed the door and turned back, Jason's eyes followed me with a mixture of sorrow and respect. Lauren avoided my gaze altogether. "Actions," I repeated quietly. "That is all I will accept now, for Emma's sake, not mine." "Oh?" The room stayed silent for a long moment. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second pulling us further from the life we had lived and closer to the one I had drawn with these documents. Finally Jason spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I am sorry, Dad. I know that doesn't erase what we tried to do, but I want to mean it." I studied his face, the boy I had raised still flickering beneath the man shaped by weakness and fear. "Then show me," I said. "Show me with what you build from here." Lauren gave a bitter laugh and shook her head. "You'll regret this." I met her words with calm. "The only thing I regret is how blind I was until now." When they finally left, the sound of the door closing behind them felt like the turn of a river current. The course had shifted. No longer would my life flow into their demands. It would move toward Emma, steady and sure. I poured myself a glass of water and sat in the quiet. For the first time in years, I felt a strange peace, The guilt of saying no had always weighed on me heavier than the cost of saying yes. Now that guilt was gone. In its place was resolve. May's portrait seemed to glow softly in the dim light. I whispered to her, "The river has turned, my love. For Emma, it will run strong." The house felt different that night. Not empty, not heavy with betrayal, but guarded, as though the walls themselves understood the boundaries now set. The current of my life was no longer theirs to control. It belonged to Emma's future, and to the dignity I refused to surrender. The days after that meeting felt different in ways both sharp and subtle. My house no longer seemed to bleed. For years money had slipped out of it like water through cupped hands, but now the flow had stopped. I woke each morning with the same quiet routine, coffee in the kitchen, a slow walk to the mailbox. But beneath the familiar steps was a steadiness I had not felt in a long time. The neighborhood, though, was not blind. Word travels fast on quiet streets. At the grocery store, I caught the sideways glances, the faint whispering near the produce aisle, "Mrs." Green lingered by her cart a little longer than usual before saying, "I hope everything's all right, Walter." Her eyes were kind but searching. I gave her the sort of smile that tells half a truth. Things are as they should be. That was enough for her. It would have to be enough for anyone. I heard the rest in fragments. A neighbor mentioning that Jason's SUV had been listed for sale online. A passing comment about Lauren canceling her yoga studio membership. Their lives had begun to show cracks without my money patching the holes. I did not take satisfaction in it. Not exactly. But I felt the justice in it. At night the house was quieter. I no longer sat up waiting for the phone to buzz with some new request dressed as an emergency. No more late-night pleas for rent money or tuition checks. The silence was heavy at first, almost lonely. But then I realized it was a kind of healing. The absence of demands gave me space to breathe, to think, to remember May without resentment in my heart. I saw Jason once at the hardware store. He looked tired, the kind of tired that settles in the bones. His shirt was smudged with dust, his hands rougher than I had seen them in years. He told me he had picked up shifts with a construction crew, union work, steady hours. He did not ask me for anything. Not money, not advice. He only asked if I would be willing to be a reference when he applied for full-time. I agreed. That was different. That was honest. Lauren was harder to read. I heard from a neighbor that she had been trying to run a small boutique business online, buying goods she could not afford on credit and hoping to sell them quickly. Without my steady deposits, the debts had caught up with her. There were whispers of late notices, of collectors calling. I thought of her polished smile at the party, the way she had looked at my countertops as though they were already hers. Now she was learning that appearances cannot be bought with borrowed money forever. Emma came to see me after school one afternoon, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She climbed onto the porch swing and sat close beside me. "Mom says things are hard right now," she admitted, her voice small. I listened, and then told her the truth she could hold on to without fear. "Hard times teach us things, easy times never can. Your parents will learn, and you will see how strong you can be." She leaned her head against my arm, and in that moment I knew I had chosen the right path. I spent the evening sorting through old boxes in the attic, putting order to things I had let slide. May's handwritten recipes, Emma's baby clothes, old invoices from the company. It felt good to see where everything belonged. For too long, I had lived like a man trying to plug leaks faster than they sprang. Now, I was the keeper of what remained, not the source of what was squandered. Some nights were harder. I would sit in the quiet and wonder if Jason hated me, if Lauren cursed my name. I would ask myself if cutting them off was too sharp, too final. But then I would remember Emma's whisper in the hallway, her small body trembling against mine, begging me not to let them take what was not theirs. That memory steadied me like steel. The house no longer bled, but neither did it feel empty. It felt watchful. The walls seemed to know they were safe again. I could walk from room to room and sense May's approval, not in words but in the calm that had returned. The air was lighter. The silence was no longer a burden. I did not know what the coming months would bring for Jason and Lauren. I only knew that the line had been drawn. They would either rise to meet the challenge or sink under the weight of their own choices. Either way, I would not rescue them again. My rescue was reserved for Emma, for her future, for the promise I had made to May and to myself. The river had turned, and the house had stopped bleeding. For the first time in years, I could finally hear my own heartbeat without the sound of coins slipping through my fingers. One afternoon, I came home from the store to find an envelope slipped through my mail slot. My name was written across it in uneven letters, purple marker smudged where a small hand had pressed too hard. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it carefully, unfolding a piece of construction paper. Inside was a drawing. Emma had sketched us by the mountain lake, where we had gone fishing last summer. The water was blue crayon scribbles, the trees tall and green, and there we were, stick figures smiling beside a teal bicycle. At the bottom she had written, "We're okay, Grandpa." I sat staring at it for a long time, my throat tight. It was more than a drawing. It was her way of telling me she understood something had shifted. Children always notice more than we think. She had seen the cracks, the whispers, the tension that adults try to hide. But instead of breaking, she had chosen to offer reassurance, as if the 8-year-old was the one steadying me. When she came over later that week, I set the drawing on the kitchen table between us. She climbed onto the chair, swinging her legs, her backpack still on. I poured her a glass of chocolate milk and pushed a plate of cookies toward her. "You have a real gift," I told her, tapping the paper. "This says more than most grown-ups ever can." She blushed and looked down. "I wanted you to know we'll be fine, even if Mom and Dad are mad." Her honesty cut me to the bone. I reached across and held her hand, small and warm against mine. "Emma, I need you to hear me clearly. None of what has happened changes how much I love you. Your parents made choices, and now they have to learn from them. But you are safe. You will always be safe with me." She nodded slowly, her eyes shining. "Mom says money makes everything hard. Is that true?" I leaned back, searching for words she could carry without being burdened. Money shows who people really are. It can make selfish people act more selfish. But it can also be used to help, to build, to give opportunities. What matters most is what you choose to do with it. Her face lit up a little. "Like saving for college?" I smiled. "Exactly. You can go to any college you want. Study anything that makes your heart light up. Veterinary school, engineering, teaching. There will be money for that because I've made sure of it." Her eyes widened. "Even veterinary school? That's really expensive." "Especially veterinary school," I said, laughing softly. "And if you change your mind, that's fine too. The trust I set up will be there to give you a start, whatever path you choose. It's locked away until you're old enough to make wise decisions, but when that time comes, it will be yours." She took a cookie, her shoulders relaxing. "What about Mom and Dad?" "They have to work hard now," I answered honestly. "They have to prove to themselves, and maybe to me someday, that they can stand on their own 2 feet. My help is for you, not for them." She grew quiet, staring at the drawing. Then she whispered, "I wish they loved you the way I do." The words struck deep. I pulled her close, feeling her small frame against my chest. "Love comes in many forms," I told her softly. "But what matters is that you and I share it, and nothing can take that away." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the swing on the porch outside. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright with curiosity. "Can we look at college brochures? I want to see what the schools look like." I chuckled and reached for my laptop. "Of course we can. We have all the time in the world to dream." We spent the rest of the afternoon scrolling through pictures. She pointed at dorm rooms, libraries, and grassy quads, asking endless questions. I answered each one, feeling May's presence in the room as surely as if she were leaning over my shoulder. Emma's laughter filled the kitchen, chasing away the shadows that had haunted these walls. When she left that evening, I placed her drawing on the refrigerator next to the grocery list. Every time I walked past it, I felt the same surge of resolve. The money I had earned, the home I had built, the sacrifices I had made, none of it was wasted. It had led to this moment, a future drawn in purple marker by a child who believed in us. And for her, I would keep it safe, no matter the cost. The seasons turned one after another, and with each change I measured the distance between promises and proof. Autumn came first, the mountains burning red and gold, and Jason called me one evening to say he had joined the union crew full-time. His voice carried a rough weariness I had not heard before, the kind that comes from honest labor. He did not ask me for money. Instead, he asked if I would come watch Emma at her fall festival while he worked late. I said yes. That was the sort of request a father could honor without shame. In November, I saw him again at the grocery store, his boots dusty, a thermos of coffee tucked under his arm. He looked tired but straighter somehow, like a man carrying his own weight. We spoke quietly in the produce aisle. He admitted the bills were hard, that some nights he and Lauren argued until their voices gave out. But then he said Emma had been doing better in school, that she seemed lighter when she came home from my house. He thanked me for being there for her. Those words mattered more to me than any repayment could. Winter came with its long nights and biting wind. Snow piled against the porch steps, and I found myself sitting alone with memories of May more often than not. But I also noticed the changes across town. Jason still showed up for work, even when the temperatures dropped below freezing. Lauren, though, stumbled. I heard from a neighbor that she had taken out a high-interest loan to keep her boutique afloat, and when it failed she had to do community service hours at the church pantry. I saw her there one afternoon when I dropped off canned goods. She kept her head down, her hands moving quickly over the shelves. When our eyes met, she gave me a stiff nod, but later, as I was leaving, I heard her murmur, "Thank you for helping Emma." It was the first unpolished thing she had said to me in years. The winter passed, and spring brought azaleas blooming along the fence line. Jason came by the house one evening with dirt still under his nails and a tentative smile. "Dad," he said, "I wanted you to see this." He handed me a photo of Emma at her science fair, standing proudly beside a model she had built. For the first time in a long while, his pride was not borrowed from my wallet. It was his, earned by being present, by choosing to stay instead of running from responsibility. Lauren was slower to change. She still looked at me with wary eyes whenever we crossed paths. But at Emma's school play, she approached me, awkward and hesitant. "I know I have no right," she said, "but thank you for what you've done for her." The words cracked as they left her mouth, but they were real. I nodded, not offering forgiveness yet, only acknowledgement. Proof, not promises, was what I needed. Through all these months, I kept my boundaries firm. No checks, no cash slipped across the table, no rescues from overdue bills. What I did give was direct support for Emma. I opened a 529 plan and contributed steadily, something she would not touch until college. When she needed rides, I picked her up. When Jason had late shifts, she stayed with me and did homework at my kitchen table. I cooked her favorite grilled cheese and listened as she told me about school. These were the investments I was willing to make. Some nights were still heavy. I missed May deeply when the house grew too quiet. On Sundays I walked through the garden alone, wondering if I had been too hard, if the line I drew had cut deeper than it should. But then Emma would come bouncing through the gate with her backpack and her endless questions, and I would remember why the boundaries mattered. By summer, the air was warm again, and the roses May planted bloomed in waves of color. I received an email from my attorney reminding me that the final trust documents were ready for signature. I read through them carefully. Each line carried the weight of the past year, each clause a shield around Emma's future. At the bottom was one question she had added for me. Did I want to include conditional support for Jason's counseling and recovery if he continued to show progress? I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair. The house was quiet, the evening light soft across the floorboards. A year had passed. Promises had been tested. Proof had begun to appear. Jason was working, learning. Lauren was bending, slowly. Emma was thriving. And I, though still scarred by betrayal, had found steadiness again. Proof, not promises. That was the bridge that had carried us through. The heat of late summer had settled over Asheville, and the air in the evenings smelled of cut grass and charcoal from neighbors' grills. I sat on my porch most nights, watching the fireflies blink across the yard, thinking about how far we had come in a year. It felt like standing on a bridge, one side anchored in betrayal, and the other in the possibility of something better. Jason had kept his word in ways I did not expect. He worked steady hours with the crew, long days under the sun, his skin burned darker and his shoulders broader. I saw him once at a gas station, his boots caked in mud, and his shirt streaked with sweat. He looked worn but solid, like a man who was finally beginning to understand the value of carrying his own weight. He spoke carefully without excuses. "It's hard," he admitted, "but I'm making it." Emma looks up to me more when I come home tired from work instead of empty-handed. That confession carried more proof than any promise he had made before. Lauren was slower to shift. She still carried that edge in her eyes, the habit of calculation, but there were cracks now in the polished armor. At church one Sunday, I noticed her setting up chairs for a community dinner, her hands moving quickly, her face flushed. She did not see me watching. When she finally looked up, she offered a faint smile, not the staged kind, but something fragile, unsteady. Later that week, she stopped me outside the school. Her voice was tight. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I want you to know I'm trying." It wasn't much, but it was the first thing she had said that did not feel rehearsed. Emma thrived through it all. Her laughter filled my kitchen in the afternoons when she came over to do homework. She sprawled across the table with her notebooks while I cooked grilled cheese sandwiches or stirred a pot of soup. Sometimes she would pause and ask me questions too big for her age. "Do people really change, Grandpa?" I would set down my spoon and answer honestly. "They can, but change is proven, not promised. You'll see it in what they do, not what they say." She always nodded like she understood more than her years allowed. The holidays were different that year. At Thanksgiving, I hosted a small dinner. Jason arrived with a casserole, humble but earnest, and set it on the table without fanfare. Emma hugged me tight as she came through the door, and Lauren followed behind carrying paper plates. We ate together with an uneasy truce. No one mentioned money. No one asked for help. Afterward, Jason stayed to help wash dishes, sleeves rolled up, hands steady in the warm water. I caught him glancing at me a few times, his eyes carrying something I had not seen since he was a boy. Respect. Winter brought snow across the mountains, heavy enough to quiet the town. I spent Christmas Eve alone with Emma, building a fire and reading her May's old storybook. Jason came late, straight from a job, his boots leaving tracks across the porch. He sat by the fire with us, tired but content. For the first time in years, I felt the warmth of family without the shadow of expectation pressing against me. As spring returned, the azaleas bloomed bright along the fence line. My attorney sent me the final copy of the trust documents, each clause neatly typed, each protection in place. At the bottom was the conditional clause I had added, stating that if Jason and Lauren showed consistent change, steady work, no debts tied to me, care for Emma, I would revisit their share. I read it through slowly, feeling both caution and hope. One evening I invited Jason to the porch. The sun was low, the air thick with the smell of honeysuckle. I slid a glass of iced tea across the table. "I've seen the work you're doing," I told him. "It matters. Keep at it." He looked at me, his eyes damp, and whispered, "I will, Dad. I don't want to lose what's left of us." His words carried weight this time, not because of how they sounded, but because of the sweat on his shirt, the calluses on his hands, the tired lines on his face. A year had stretched like a bridge, each season a plank laid down by action, not talk. I had not forgiven everything. The memory of their betrayal still cut deep. But proof had begun to appear, steady and undeniable, and I held on to that. May would have told me to keep watching, to keep measuring, to keep Emma safe above all else. I intended to do just that. The bridge was not complete, but it was strong enough to stand on for now. Late summer settled soft across Asheville, the kind of warm evening where the air held the scent of cut grass and charcoal smoke. I decided to host a small cookout in my backyard, nothing fancy, just hamburgers on the grill and a folding table set with paper plates. The roses May planted years ago had bloomed a second time, and their colors framed the yard with quiet grace. I pulled out enough chairs for everyone, and left one extra at the end of the table, empty, waiting. Emma was the first to arrive, riding the teal bicycle I had given her. She skidded to a stop in the driveway, her hair flying in the golden light, her smile as bright as the fireflies already beginning to spark in the bushes. "Grandpa, I beat my best time," she shouted proudly, leaning the bike against the porch before running into my arms. Holding her felt like holding the very reason for every choice I had made. Jason arrived next, carrying a casserole dish with foil stretched across the top. He looked thinner, his shirt damp from work, but there was steadiness in his eyes. He set the dish on the table without explanation, only a nod, as if to say he understood that contributions mattered more than excuses. Lauren came behind him, slower, quieter than usual. She carried paper plates in a plastic bag, her expression tight, but when she handed them to me she murmured, "Thank you for inviting us." The words were strained but real, and I accepted them for what they were. We ate together under the fading light, the fireflies brightening as the sun dropped below the trees. Jason complimented the burgers, Emma chattered about her new science project, and Lauren sat with her hands folded, speaking little. There was still a distance between us, but it felt different now, less like a wall and more like a space that might one day be crossed. I listened more than I spoke, letting the rhythm of their voices fill the evening. At one point, Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Grandpa, can we play cards after dinner like we used to?" I smiled and agreed. She grinned wide, and for a moment the heaviness around the table lifted, carried away on the laughter of a child who still believed in family. When the plates were cleared, Jason stayed behind to help wash the dishes. His hands moved steadily in the sink, sleeves rolled, his face thoughtful. "Dad," he said quietly, "I know it'll take time, but I want to keep earning back what I lost with you." I met his eyes and answered plainly, "Actions, Jason. That's all that matters now." He nodded, and I could see that he understood. Lauren kept her distance, standing near the roses, looking out at the yard. When I joined her, she didn't turn. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "I was wrong. I let greed speak louder than love. I don't expect you to forgive me." Her voice trembled but did not break. I stood beside her without reply. Sometimes silence is the only answer when words cannot heal what has been done. As the evening wound down, Emma begged for one last ride on her bicycle before bed. Jason watched her pedal loops around the yard, his face softer than I had seen in years. Lauren clapped lightly when Emma braked to a stop, dust rising around her wheels. For a fleeting moment, we looked like any family on a summer night, gathered in the glow of porch lights, laughter mixing with the hum of crickets. When they left, the yard grew quiet again. I folded the chairs but left one standing at the end of the table, empty. I let it stay there as the fireflies pulsed brighter in the darkness. That chair was more than a seat. It was a symbol, a reminder that there was still room for something better if they chose to change, truly change, not with words but with proof. I sat alone, sipping the last of my iced tea, listening to the night settle around me. I did not know what the future held for Jason and Lauren. Perhaps they would rebuild themselves, perhaps they would not. But the chair remained open, waiting. My dignity was intact, my distance was clear, and my love for Emma was unshaken. Whatever came next, the table of my life still had space for those willing to sit with honesty. The night closed gently, leaving the question unanswered, and for the first time in a long while, I was at peace with not knowing. In the end, I chose dignity over deception, and love over weakness. Jason and Lauren learned that greed has consequences, and Emma learned that her future is safe because someone stood guard for her. The trust will carry her forward, and the empty chair at my table will always remind me that redemption is possible but never guaranteed. Life taught me that boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection, and true love proves itself through actions. What do you think, my friends? Would you have done the same? Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more stories.